Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined as always by Chris Bugaj. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Rachel. All right, do I have a story for you? So
I'm so excited.
Me too. This was a good one. This is a nice, feeling good story, okay? So, I work with a team of facilitators, and they work with they're the direct contacts with the speech therapists and teachers and really with the kids. And then I get pulled into certain situations. Well, we have a therapist that works in our school district that is relatively new, like maybe 2 or 3 years into being a speech therapist, and but very savvy in the ways of AAC, has been studying it, and is really, just inherently presumes potential and understands having access to a robust language system. The whole the things we talk about, plus is really working through helping other people learn that, right? The teachers that she supports. Anyway, she reached out and she said, I love my assistive technology person, but Chris, I feel like I need you for this one. Can we team it together? And I was like, I reached out to the assistive technology person. I was like, you cool with me? Like, I'm here to support you as well. I don't want you to feel like I'm stepping on your... She's like, no, if she wants to, let's all do it together. I was like, great. So we all jump on this call together. And in fact, it's one of the rare times that I could... She's like, well, I have 2:30 this afternoon. Any chance you could jump on a call? And I did. And it was like, oh, I can jump on, right? I was like, yes, I can do that. So the same day that she reached out an email, we were able to jump on the call later that day. And here's what the problem was. So I'm going to throw the problem to you, see what you would say, and then I'm going to tell you how I answered it and see how our answers line up, okay? But I'm pretty confident we're going to land on the same thing. Okay, because I would never put you in that position, right, if I didn't think that. Okay, here it goes. So she said, all right, I have this student around 4th grade who has been using AAC, and he is really efficient at using his AAC. Like, he knows it's Lamp Words for Life on an iPad, and he knows where a lot of the words are. And his general ed teacher gave the speech therapist some academic words to put on there, and she added them, right? And that is one of the reasons she was okay with doing that. She talks to the teacher about descriptive teaching and using the strategy of describing these academic words before putting them on there. But one of the reasons she felt comfortable putting them on there is that the learner himself, this 4th grader, puts words on there, words that are important to him. He has learned the operational skill of adding words, okay? Which in 4th grade, yeah, exactly, right? It's like, awesome. She goes, now here's what's happening. He's adding words, and he'll put them on a page. And if you're familiar with Lamp Words for Life, you'll know that lots of times on the 3rd level, or the 3rd hit, there's spaces between the words, right? So it's word. If you think of a grid, word, space, word, space, intentionally done this way, right? Well, when he started putting some certain words in that were important to him, these key vocabulary words, he hadn't really learned that pattern yet. So they were all sort of clumped at the top of the screen in the first 3 or 4 rows, and not spread out in the same way. Plus, they weren't sure. I asked, well, does he kind of understand the thought process of why you might put something someplace, right? So again, just for everyone listening, the reason it's called language acquisition through motor planning words for life is that once you put a word where it goes, what you develop the motor sequence, like you hit this button plus this button plus this button equals saying the word out loud, that is the sequence. Like now you've built it, and that's where it is, and it's there for your life, hence words for life. So we were thinking, okay, as he's adding words, does he understand the rationale? And so she said, and he keeps adding these words now that he knows how to do it. Every time he hears a new word, he just adds it. And is that a good thing or not? Because is he thinking through the process of, well, should I add this word? How long do I need this word? When should I jump over to the keyboard and type out the word? Versus when do I need to have it as a word that has its own motor plan of 3 hits or less, which is the way Lamp Words for Life works. So because he was doing this at such a rate, one of the ideas that they thought about was, what if we opened up we put a password behind it so that if he tried to edit it, it would the password menu would pop up and ask you to put a password on it, and he would know the password. This way he couldn't add more words. Chris, what do you think about that? What would your suggestion be? Rachel Madel, what would your suggestion be?
I have one question I want to ask first.
Sure.
Is the student also adding words that are already on the system, and he's not aware that they're on the system, so he's just adding words every time he needs a word, but there's other words that he could potentially find that are already on the system?
Excellent question. I asked the exact same thing. Well, I asked it in relation to this while they were just sort of describing, because the way it starts is, Pete, tell me about the learner, right? Sometimes he's typing in words and sentences. I'm like, aha, that tells me he has literacy skills. He's typing to a certain extent. So then I asked, does he understand the search function? Oh, yeah, he knows how to search. He uses the keyboard to search. And then I asked the exact same thing. Does he know? Yes, he knows to search before adding a word. We've seen him do that. Awesome.
Great. What a skill. Yes. I love this student. Okay. Great. So in regards to the specific question that you just ended with, which was, should we put a password that prohibits him from editing? My first inclination is to say no. That wouldn't be my first step, because what we're looking at is a student that has really incredible skills. And so I wouldn't want to take those skills away. I would want to try to shape those skills into teaching the student with more detail and specificity and nuance as to the questions that we would want to consider as we're deciding whether or not we add a word, whether we should type a word, and doing a lot of teaching around that. And so I feel like the first step is, noticing when the student is adding a word, trying to pause that situation and say, like, hey, it seems like you want to add the word, I don't know, umbrella. Let me show you what I would think about and the questions I would ask myself before I decided to add this, and really helping a student think through that process, maybe having some questions outlined on a visual, like a piece of paper or a checklist or something like that. Because you're laughing. Is this exactly what you said?
Get out of my brain, Rachel Madel. It's exactly what I said.
Oh, it's so funny how we're so aligned. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of teaching that can be done. And I think the first step is, and I'm not exactly sure how this was framed to you, but I think when we see these types of situations happen, we can very easily get into a mindset of this is a problem that we need to fix. And I feel like this is not a problem. This is a celebration. The fact that the student has all these skills is so exciting to me as a clinician. And my first step would be making sure the entire team looked at this as, wow, can we believe this student has such incredible skills that they're able to demonstrate literacy, understand how to, participate in some of these kind of operational AAC skills. And I think that reframing is really important, because so often we can be like, well, the student's just doing this thing, and it becomes a problem in our own mind. And I'm totally guilty of that too. Sometimes I'm like, oh, like this is a problem and we need a solution. Like, yes, we can shape this experience for the student, but I think it's really important to celebrate these skills and really make sure the team is like celebrating them alongside of the student. Because when we approach the student, we can approach it from a place of celebration and really empowerment. Like, I'm so excited, dude, that you're able to add words to your device, and that's awesome. Let me help shape that experience for you so we can be efficient, we can be effective, and we can save you time. And I can show you a few different things that maybe you haven't thought of yet.
Exactly. Now, just a little piece, because you didn't have this information, but the one other thing I said besides what you said is the teacher has their own device. So, and the speech therapist has their own device. So as another way to teach it, we said, the general ed teacher gave us these words. Where would I add them on my device? I think it would go here and here and here. I'm going to put mine here, right? So modeling that on your device as it goes over before he does his.
Is this student in a mainstream classroom? Like, what's the student's classroom all about?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but I believe he spends most of his time in general education, yes.
Because my other thought process was that depending on his classroom situation, like if he was in a classroom that had other students using AAC, like what a beautiful opportunity to do some explicit teaching around operational AAC skills, like adding a word, and what an amazing literacy opportunity for other students in the classroom who are working on, literacy skills, showcasing the student as like, look what he can do, again, really helps empower the student and celebrating them for all of these amazing skills that they've developed.
Love it. Love it. All right. So here's the end of that story, Rachel. Again, I'm smiling from ear to ear. The very next day, I get an email from the speech language pathologist, and she's like, "You're not going to believe it." And she sent me a little video over the shoulder so I couldn't see the kid's face or anyone else's faces, just the two iPads, right? And you hear the teacher go, "Hey, see this? Look at my page. It's got spaces in between the words. Look at your page. It doesn't have any spaces. Let me go to this page. This one has spaces. And look, on yours, this one has spaces too. So the one you made doesn't look the same here. What should we do?" She didn't say move it. She said, "What should we do?" Immediately, he starts moving the words around to be, word space, just like his other pages. Like immediately he was like, oh yeah, it should be like that, right? And so just in one day, teaching him that comparison, like, oh, right, that's like the initial stage of saying, yeah, things have to stay in the same spot and they have to be there intentionally. And so, yes, that was just such a, it made me feel really good. Like, yes, look, this kid, we really helped this kid today, One
other thought I'm thinking, Chris, is, and it's actually like, I haven't really thought about this before in the sense of thinking about doing this for a student. I've definitely done this and think about doing this for communication partners all the time, but really doing some explicit teaching on how LAMP Words for Life is set up, because I feel like there's a lot of patterns and we might kind of intuitively start learning the patterns for specific words. But if we zoom out and teach the student, like, let's talk about how this system is set up and why it's set up this way. And I feel like there could be really a lot of power in explaining in an explicit way why this system was set up that way. I feel like there's opportunities to understand grammar and, all these different things that went into designing that system. And it sounds like this student picks things up really quickly, is a really fast learner. And so I would also add to kind of the suggestion list, let's do some explicit teaching around like how the device was set up and how AAC systems are set up. And I think there's opportunities for more learning here because the student is obviously interested in his device to the point where he's, looking at other people's devices, then changing his, like, I feel like he would actually love to understand with more detail how the system is set up and why it's set up that way.
1,000% agree. Why not lead with that notion, right? So, great stuff.
Yes, I want to work with that student. Can I be on that team? I would love to meet that student.
I want to go and say, I really don't know what to do. I think I better come see that kid in person, just so I can come be in person and play with the kid and have fun. Yeah, amazing stuff. And kudos to this speech therapist and this teacher who are, thinking in an inclusive, general ed's first sort of way, inclusive mindset sort of way, thinking we're going to teach the student all the things, leading with education over restriction. They've got the mindset, right? And it's just so good to see. Love it.
Chris, what's your interview about today?
The interview today is with someone named Benjamin Gibbs. And if you're a longtime listener to the podcast, you know that there's been previous interviews where people interview me. So at George Mason University, there are professors there that part of the experience of one of their classes is to contact somebody who works in assistive technology and interview them about what it's like to work in a school or wherever in the field of assistive technology. So this is the latest version of that, where this particular person, Benjamin Gibbs, was interviewing me. Now, it just so happens that Benjamin Gibbs uses AAC. So how perfect. I said, Benjamin, would you mind recording? And if it turns out you don't want to share it, then we don't have to share it. But if you wouldn't mind recording, it could go on the podcast. And afterwards, he said, yes, feel free to share it. So that's what you're about to hear. Now, that said, listeners, I want to give you some advice on how to maybe listen to this episode. So when I was talking to Benjamin, one of the things that came up in our conversation was that he only feels like he needs to use his AAC when he's with people that he's sort of unfamiliar with. And because most of his close peers and family, they understand what he's saying because he is around them so often. So he only uses it occasionally when to clarify things with that population. And then with strangers or a greater population, he often leans into his AAC a little bit more. Well, we got comfortable very quickly, and he felt like he didn't really need to use his AAC that much. He does. You're going to hear it here in the episode. He definitely uses his AAC, but he often uses his oral speech to make his points. That said, there were times where I wasn't exactly sure what he was saying, and I had the cue of the captions on. I was able to see him, and I wanted to respect his choice and how he was communicating, which was using his oral speech in those moments. And then I summarized what I thought I heard him say. So there might be moments where even if you were reading the transcript might not be 100% accurate. So what I'm going to invite you to do is, like, if you're used to listening to the podcast at 1.5 speed or 1.25 speed, I know I listen to it at that speed, you might slow down. It might help you with some of what Benjamin is saying, seeing as that you're not there to actually see him and get those same cues. And in those cases, I do try to summarize, and then Benjamin says, yes, that's what I was trying to say, or no, not exactly, and then he clarifies. So it's an excellent interview because we get into a lot of deep stuff about assistive technology, but also the life experience of using AAC. So without further ado, here's Benjamin Gibbs' interview with Chris Bugaj.
We'd like to thank all of the wonderful Patreon supporters who make this show possible. This podcast is funded by listeners just like you who've signed up at patreon.com/talkingwithtech to show their support. Because of the generosity of our amazing Patreon community, we're able to pay Luke and Michaela, our podcast producer and audio engineer, who keep the show looking and sounding great. Patreon supporters also receive bonus content, such as early access to interviews, behind-the-scenes recordings, additional curated resources and materials, and so much more. Check it out at patreon.com/talkingwithtech. Now let's head back into the episode.
Welcome to the Talking with Tech podcast. My name's Chris Bugaj, and today I'm joined with someone named Ben Gibbs. And let me give you some context here of how we met. For the last maybe 3 or 4 years, I have been on a list from someone. Her name's Dr. Cindy George, who teaches a class over at George Mason University. And one of the assignments every year for this class is to reach out to someone, for the students in that class, to reach out to someone working in assistive technology and ask them questions, interview them about their evaluation process and how they consider assistive technology for the students that they support. And so we've featured episodes like that in the past here on the podcast. You can go back and listen, listeners, to previous interviews. So that is, Ben reached out to me and said, hey, I'm in Dr. Cindy George's class. I was given your name. Would you be willing to jump on? And I said, yes. And then we said, well, what about recording it? And particularly because Ben said, hey, Chris, you should know I'm an AAC user. And I said, hey, I do a podcast with Rachel Madel on AAC. So would you like to record? And Ben was gracious enough to say yes. So without further ado, and enough of me, I'm going to turn it over to Ben. Ben, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit to the listeners? And then I say ask away, since this is your interview of me rather than my interview of you.
My name is Ben Gibbs, and there are 2 avenues I want to take in talking about my background. I would like to tell listeners that I am currently studying assistive technology at George Mason University, and I have a unique connection to AT since I am an AT user, more specifically an AAC user myself. To talk a little about my personal experiences with AAC, I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when I was 18 months old. My CP affects my ability to walk and talk. I can walk and talk, I just have a different gait than most people, and I have a speech impediment that is difficult for the unfamiliar listener to understand. So, when I was in 5th grade, I was introduced to my first communication device, a Dynavox 3000, if I can remember off the top of my head. But unfortunately, the device got abandoned. Because back then, my classmates used pencil and paper. So being the only kid in the class with an electronic device made me stick out. It made me different from my peers. But then 6 years later, when I was 17, a junior in high school, I was introduced to the discontinued iPad app called Speak It, and it was introduced pro loquo. Unfortunately, I also abandoned using the AAC apps on my iPad, and I think I abandoned Speak It because it got discontinued, and pro loquo probably because I was 17, and I think in an earlier episode you or Rachel or another guest mentioned how AAC is more effective the earlier it's taught. Because it's more like learning another language than, let's say, learning to use a social media application. So, since I started learning in my late teens, it was harder than if I had learned it earlier. Changing gears to my professional side, I had a creative academic upbringing, which is super helpful because when finding AT solutions for clients, you sometimes need to think outside the box and have a creative mindset. I majored in photography at Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia, and photography was a difficult field to get into. So, I decided to combine my photography with web design. And I'm pretty good at web design. I am actually the web designer for Pursuit Adaptive Sports and Recreation, an organization that provides adults with disabilities sporting and recreational opportunities in the DMV area. Then web design kind of got me into the field of IT, which led me to an interest in data analytics. I learned and actually got the opportunity to teach others with disabilities the database querying language, structured query language. And it was from there I grew a passion for helping people. And others said to me, I had the passion for helping people, I had the technology knowledge, I had the creativity. So why not assistive technology? And what's even better is I have experience of being in my client's shoes. So I know why it's so important finding assistive technology that they're comfortable with using. So, me being able to relate to my client in that way is going to be so beneficial. And that's a little, okay, maybe a lot, about me and my background.
All right, Ben, I'm really going to resist. I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail at resisting to ask you for follow-up questions because I'm always in this mindset of like, well, listeners are going to have the same questions I have. So do you mind if I just ask 2 clarifying questions? So the first one, is that okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. The first one is you mentioned how you moved from Dynavox and then that got abandoned and then Speak It, but then that eventually wasn't being updated anymore. And you didn't abandon it so much as that just as the technology changes and you didn't have access to it anymore. And then you moved to Pro Quo. You said that was maybe around 17 years old that you were introduced to Pro Quo. And I'm also guessing you were down in Southern Virginia. Is that?
No, I am in no zone.
Gotcha. So you didn't grow up near Longwood. You just went to Longwood.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're from up here near me. Okay. Fantastic. So when you moved from Pro Quo, what did you move to? Can I ask what you're using right now?
No. Wait, hold on.
So, before I answer that question, I would just like to let listeners know I listened to episodes of the podcast, and so I was able to estimate some of the questions you may ask me and prepare my answers on my AAC device. But I wasn't able to anticipate every single question. So, I will answer questions that I wasn't able to anticipate in my own voice. I will speak slowly and as clearly as I can. I will also use my AAC device to provide a few words here and there for context. Since if the context of my speech is understood, my speech does become more intelligible.
No, answer to your question. And cerebral protocol does engage the audience, does not know protocol has two interfaces. As a usual then I don't communicate through symbols and that's all they can type out what they want to say. So I am just typing out what I want to say.
Okay, so you're using Proloquo. Let me make sure I got this correct. You're using Proloquo. You're still using Proloquo, but you're primarily using it in flipping over to the keyboard and typing what you say, as opposed to trying to find the pictures or the words that way. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to dig in here, just if that's okay for Ben. Have you tried other apps and said, no, I'm going to stick with Proloquo? And are you using word prediction at all?
That is a great question. So, no, those and so as I have tried other apps there is an app called Speech Assistant ASC has it has more of a data data. I'm sorry.
No, please take your time.
Database.
It's more it's more of a data base of phrases that I can create. So I can start typing and it will automatically find what I may want to say, so I do not have to type out the entire thing. However, I grew up in a family and I had friends who are very good at understanding my verbal speech. So, because the need for AAC was not as important to me as somebody who has no verbal communication. I never had to depend on it, so I've not gotten exposed to a lot of other apps. Oh, yeah. And I also my mom is very great at English and at writing, so she thought it's very important for me to know how to spell correctly. So I did not grow up around more rules tradition, and because I did not grow up around it, I had to I I am trying to think of the right thing to say because I did not grow up around rules, traditions. I am still getting used to looking at the options as I start, and sometimes I am very concentrated on typing. I completely forget.
All right, Ben, let me see if I summarize this and get it correct. So first thing that I think I heard you say was that you have experimented with other apps, but one feature that was really important to you was a large database of different voices so you could find the voice that you liked and preferred the most. Is that accurate so far?
Yes,
And Proloquo has a lot of different voices. So you said, this is the one that sort of works for me. Then I think a couple other things that I heard you say is that it was really important to you and your mom and your family that you learn how to spell because you're learning how to spell. And that is a way that you can clarify communication to unfamiliar listeners. But because you're around your friends and family so much and they understand what you're saying, you don't need to use the AAC around them as much. Is that fair?
yeah,
But unfamiliar listeners, then you go over and that's where you start to type.
yes,
Okay. And then what I think I heard you say was that because you didn't really grow up using AAC, it was tried and abandoned, right? Is I didn't really get used to typing faster a lot to convey. I got better at enunciating and going slowly and using my speaking voice, my organic speaking voice to clarify what I needed. But occasionally, or what I'm trying to say, but occasionally, if that communication breaks down, then I go over and I do the typing. Is that all a good summary of what you're trying to convey?
I never said anything. It's basically about how I use verbal communication. However, that is also true. So,
I never said anything specifically about verbal communication, but that is also true.
Okay, gotcha. I maybe heard that wrong, right? All right, Ben. Well, I won't dig into it anymore. I think you've done a great job explaining, kind of your history with AAC. And we started off saying this is an interview. You're interviewing me, not me interviewing you. So now let's actually do that. So I'm going to turn it over to you. What kind of questions you got for me?
I have listened to a few episodes of your podcast. I especially like your interview with Jamie Grant. Hi, Jamie. So I do know some of your background already. I know that you transitioned to being an AT specialist from being an SLP. But I am curious to know, did you have any tech experience, including web design or coding, that helped drive you to AT? Or was it more using AAC to help your clients communicate when you were an SLP?
All right, excellent questions. So when I first started, I got a job at an elementary school here in Loudon, and I was a speech therapist I still keep up with all of my speech credentials, and still am very active in the community. But about 3 years in is when they asked me if I wanted to be one of the founding members of our assistive technology team. This was 20 plus years ago. And so I didn't have much experience with technology at that time, but I was also not afraid of it. And I loved to play with it and was kind of curious about it. I mean, back then, Ben, it was like in college, I went to college when email was just starting, right? So I learned a little bit of like Excel. Do you know what I mean? Like a little bit of database, that spreadsheet, not even database, maybe a little bit of database stuff, but enough to just play with it and say, hey, this is kind of cool. And I can kind of see how this can help me be more productive and then help students. And then one of the reasons I was asked, I mean, we had maybe at the time 60 different speech therapists in the county. And why I was asked to be on it is I had sort of made a little name for myself of using technology and not being afraid of it, AAC being one part of that. And Ben, I've said it many times on this podcast, all wrong. I was doing it all wrong. I wasn't afraid to use it, but I also didn't know how to use it. So many things. Oh, if I could climb into a time machine and go back and tell my younger self, oh, Chris, don't do it that way. Like just specifically, like, let's start with 2 buttons. And once you master these 2 buttons, let's more to 4 buttons and 4 to 8. And then one kid, we had a tech talk and we had to pull out pieces of paper and slide it in. And he was showing like how he would, in the top left-hand corner. So a tech talk is like got 32 cells and a knob on the back, and you turn the knob and it changes levels, just in case we have some people that are, what's a tech talk? So it's back in the day, we would have called it a mid-tech device. So he would hit the top left button and turn the knob, and hit the top left button and turn the knob. And he would be listening for what level. He could navigate the device really by using his auditory skills. He wasn't even really looking at the symbols. And back then I didn't really understand symbols and how difficult they were for people to really recognize unless you're reading. So many things I would do different. But back then, I think a lot of people hadn't figured out kind of the better way to do things. So the other thing, so I got a little bit of a name for myself that I wasn't afraid to use technology. I was trying to learn more about it. I was asking for these devices and how do we consider them, and kind of questioning the whole process back then. And then the other thing that I kind of leaned into was the I really like the notion of using video, and I thought a lot of kids liked using video and seeing themselves on video. So I did a lot of work with video. And again, back then, Ben, we had these, the giant recorders that you would put over your shoulder and put VHS tapes in and record that way. And the only digital stuff we had were these, and the listeners can't see, but it was like the size of my head. I'm holding up my hands and showing Ben, like it was the size of my head, this honking digital camera that could take some pictures, and you would slide in a 3x5 disc into the back of the camera, and you could take maybe a 15-second video with that. And so I would do a lot of videos with using the VHS, where the kids would tell stories, or we would do interviews with other teachers or the principal. Hey, let's come in and practice your language skills while you're interviewing the principal. That's kind of an authentic thing. And if I had the means back then, I would be asking the kids and getting permission to publish all that stuff. Right now, it was just, back in those days, it was really, maybe invite the parents to come in and watch, or send the videotape home with the kids so the parents could watch to see the good work that they're doing. So again, that's really how I kind of got interested in technology, was with the video stuff, a little bit of the AAC stuff, and a little bit of productivity stuff, going, oh, you know what, Chris, like my supervisor would come and see how I was collecting data and putting it into spreadsheets and using that to analyze the data and create little charts. And that she was like, no one's doing that. Can you come and do a presentation on how to do that? I was like, yeah, Excel can do that. So that got me a little reputation of, this person understands tech here, or is at least not afraid of it. And is actively trying to learn more about it. So do you want to be on the assistive technology team? And I was like, what's that? I knew a little bit what it was, but we had a half a course where we learned about assistive technology back in my grad school. Really AAC. There wasn't an assistive technology course in my grad school. There was a AAC, half a course on AAC. So it's a long answer to say that's how I got started, is through those different channels of just not being afraid to use the technology. Never did anything with web design, never did anything with coding, to answer your question. But the longtime listeners of this podcast, Ben, will tell you, I'm a big champion of coding, especially nowadays. Virginia, you might know this. Virginia was the first state in the country back in 2017, the first state in the country to adopt computer science standards. And when I saw those standards came out, I said, okay, we cannot let students with disabilities not have opportunities to code. If you could learn how to code, there's so many opportunities for jobs. And look at you, Ben, right? You have a job that's doing web design and coding, right? So it's like, how many more kids might not even get the opportunity to learn this stuff? We got to make sure that doesn't happen. And so I've been a fan of it. Plus, and a champion for it, and try and mention it on this podcast as much as possible, do presentations around it, try and get speech therapists who might be like, oh, coding, I don't know how to do that. Like, no, you can start with these fun little block coding apps, and it can help you learn. There's a language parallel. So I won't go into that whole thing. Just know that I am a big fan of that whole STEM movement. And so that we are providing opportunities for everybody around that.
The thing about coding is it's so technology basis that it really matches with the use of AT.
Agreed. Agreed. And it's so the idea around it, because of the way you think of like where coding came from in the 80s and 90s. I mean, surely before that, but when it became more mainstream, it sort of got I would say an unfair bias of this. If I were to say, hey, describe someone who codes, I think most people would, it's like this person that sits in a dark room and they eat Cheetos and they work by themselves, right? Like, but that's not it at all. Right? It's, you work on teams and you problem solve, and it's very much more community based than people think, and they think it might be a lot harder to start. Where nowadays with the block coding, you can really, there's a very, very low barrier to entry. And we like to say, like Rachel will tell you, she's like, Chris, I went to one of your sessions on coding, and I can say I know how to code now, like basic coding of just dropping blocks around. But you can build on that skill, right? Is that how kind of you learned? You went and started very basic and started moving up through the classes and that kind of stuff? It's not like you dived into Python right away, right? Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you did.
Well, I don't and jazz at Nova Community College, and the curriculum taught me HTML, CSS, Adobe Illustrator, for graphics, so I did not have any intro classes to HTML or CSS. I actually dived into it. However, back in 2008, I took a summer class, and in the summer class, I learned a little bit about HTML. So I already knew some about HTML before learning it on a more formal basis.
All right, Ben, let me make sure I understood. So you didn't have any coding in high school. You took it in Nova. So a lot of people listening are like, what's Nova? That's Northern Virginia Community College, right? So you took classes there on HTML, CSS, and Adobe Illustrator. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then
had no level knows all the three classes that I remember.
oh, so you took even more, but those are the three that kind of stand out to you. Yeah. Okay. And then when you went to Longwood, you already knew some HTML because of the Nova classes. So you were kind of a step ahead. Is that?
No, I don't like classes at normal. I've still learn one. And I feel HTML because I do a jazz and it, uh, it, I do a jazz and HTML and 2008.
Took a class in 2008.
Gotcha. And that's how you learned. Okay. So would you agree with the statement, though, that it's like anyone could learn it? Like we should give everyone the opportunity to learn HTML, to learn coding, especially in the era of ChatGPT, where you could get started with the coding and learn how to debug it and that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Awesome. What other questions you got for me? Did I answer it?
Yes. Thank you. And you answered question number 2 as well.
Okay. What was it? I'm curious.
It was going to be
My next question is, besides AAC, is there another technology you're interested in working with or learning about?
and the answer is the video.
Wait, the answer is what? What did you think it was?
The video.
Oh, the video. Yes. Back in the
Yeah.
day, let me expand on that for a second, Ben, because this is
Okay.
so when I first started on the assistive technology team, one of the things we recognized is that we wanted to grow the team and grow awareness around assistive technology. And we thought a good way to do that, we sort of understood right away, is that the power of video. So we got a very expensive, fancy Canon, huge, like it looked like a TV camera, and we made all sorts of videos. One of my teammates back in the day, Judy Schoonover, who started the team with, was on that team back in when we first started, would call me Fellini because I would like do storyboarding and write like scripts, and then we would try and do structured videos, but then we would also go out and record interview kids about why the importance of AAC, AT, all sorts of different stuff. And some of those videos still live on YouTube. Those like predated YouTube. But to continue answering that, not just video. Well, I should say, one other thing about video is that you mentioned Adobe Illustrator. Oh man, I can remember the days of wrestling with Adobe Premiere Pro and Adobe Audition. I did a podcast for many, many years called the AT Tips Cast, which is before the Talking with Tech podcast. I did that podcast, and I didn't have an audio engineer. So I used Adobe Audition to try and edit, and I was all self-taught, self-learning, watching some videos, figuring it out, making mistakes, which I'm going to guess similar to Adobe Illustrator. Like you took the class, but then a lot of it is, making mistakes and learning and playing and, Googling how to do it and looking on discussion boards, like how do they figure that out, right? What does error code 3694 mean, right? And you're like, okay. And how did they, right? So yes, that I really think a lot of my problem solving skills came around, using that technology and saying, okay, and tenacity around it. Like somehow we got to figure out how to make this work, and then also the idea that video and audio can really influence people and educate them, as a way to educate people. So all of that. And then, yes, coding is something I'm interested in, and robots is something I'm interested in. Clearly, if anyone's been listening to the podcast, I'm fascinated with the possibilities around generative AI. and yeah, so I would say my interest in technology is continuing to evolve and has been evolving since I started in speech therapy. But before that, I would not have thought. It's just funny how people grow and change. Man, I would never have guessed I'd be talking about technology back when I was in college. Do you know what I mean? Or that I'd be working in
Um,
assistive technology.
I am trying to think of a type of editing I learned about. Um, it can help somebody carry something.
Can help someone carry something.
And I am blanking on the 18 because I used to hate riding my bicycle because Vienna is a hilly place. So I have to go up hills and down. And so I avoided the bike and so an e-bike. So the motor helped me get those hills and the technology I am thinking of is something similar to that when you started talking about who bondage, it reminded me of that technology. Yeah.
All right, let me make sure I heard you correctly, Ben, and I understand. So you said Vienna, right? You grew up in Vienna, and Vienna is a hilly place, and
Yeah.
you're trying to. You said you were trying to. I think you said you were trying to think of technology to help get up and down the hills, and then you thought of like a bicycle with a motor, right? Or you were using a bicycle with a motor. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you were thinking, how do I carry stuff on a bicycle with a motor? Is that right? And not just you, maybe other people.
There's a technology similar to a motor on a bike, but it's clothing and can help people carry stuff.
It's clothing. So, all right, the way you were describing it, I was sort of thinking of like a motorized bicycle. I've had a little experience. My daughter and I went on a little trip where we were riding motorized bicycles, but you're saying it's clothing that will help people wear stuff that has a motor on it?
Well, it does not have a motor itself, but people only have to put drive
People only have to put 20% into doing something like getting up, carrying stuff, and the tech will do the rebound sign.
I
I got what you're trying to say. I'm sure.
People only have to put 20% into doing something like getting up, carrying stuff, and the tech will do the rest.
Yeah, right. Okay. So they might use a little bit of their muscles and power to kind of get things started, but the tech will help lift it or carry it or move, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Uh, like a suit or something like that would help, or a shirt, right? Or pants that would, kind of assist you move. Yeah. In some ways like a brace, right? But a brace that actually assists you rather than just keeps you stabilized, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. This sounds like an awesome idea.
as as like what?
It's already being developed. It wasn't my idea for 500.
Well, okay, so it's being developed, but I mean, doesn't mean that sometimes it's the second to market that is the big. All right, what other questions you got for me?
Okay, so and sometimes AAC does not want to vote.
Yeah, for sure. Technology in general, including AAC, has hiccups sometimes.
I know the assessment process heavily depends on the individual, but I am curious to know if you have a starting point of looking for ways to alter one's environment versus introducing new technologies to one's environment when you begin the search for AT, or does it strictly depend on the individual and their needs?
Awesome question. All right, so here's how I think of that. I absolutely think it's essential to think about the environment, especially in an educational context, because the environment can be changed. We can change the instruction. We can change the physical surroundings. We can change the furniture. We can change we can give clothing that helps lift things, right? Like we can change well, I guess that's a bad example because that would be technology. But what I'm saying is the instruction can be changed and the environment can be changed. And so that when you think of Joy Zabala's set framework, that's number 2 on the list, right? You talk about the students' abilities and then and their skills, and then the next thing you sort of consider. And Joy was here; she would be like, "It's not the next thing, Chris. You're just talking about it all at the same time, and you just put one of the things you're talking about is the environment." So you think about the students' abilities and skills, or the person's skills and abilities. You also think about the environment, and then you think about, well, what are we doing in that environment, right? So that's the student, the environment, and the tasks, and that helps you figure out the tool. That said, I also think when you said that a lot of it is about the individual and the assessment of the individual, and I agree with that, but I also think from a systemic point of view, we can look at a lot of individuals and what can we do that would be universally better, would help things be universally better for every person. And just a quick example for that is let's take it out of AAC and let's take it into dyslexia or reading, right? Learning the skill of reading. One thing that people might say is, well, if you are having trouble reading, maybe what we could do is give you a pen that you could hold with your hand and scan over text, which will read it out loud, which is totally fine. That's a great technology, and there's certain kids that I might think that might be appropriate for. But also, I would say, and maybe even more so in the context of thinking about changing the environment, why are we giving them a piece of paper in the first place? We live in 2000, 24, we're working and living in an age where we have computers and technology in our pockets. Let's teach them how to use that. And with that case, let's make sure the text that we're giving them can be read out loud by a text-to-speech application. And so, yes, they might need a pen on the off chance that eventually they might get some technology or text that is not accessible. But what work can we do to change the environment to make sure everything is accessible? And I'd rather put my minutes in changing the environment because it helps more people than getting a bunch of people individual pens. Although, I want to do that too. It's just you only have so many minutes. I'd rather focus on that systemic issue of how do we make things more universally accessible and spend a little less minutes on the individual need until that individual need is glaring, meaning we talk about a multi-tiered system of supports. I want to be really thinking, how can we provide things that are available to everyone we call it tier one, Ben. I don't know if you're familiar with this or if you've learned this in Cindy's class yet, but we think of technology or resources in 3 buckets. One bucket is tier one, accessible to everybody, available to everybody. Tier 2, groups of people might need this. And tier 3, individual might need this. I want everybody focusing on tier 1, and then we can be very precise about tier 3, as opposed to where I think I started was only thinking about tier 3 and thinking of each individual kid and what their needs were. Over time, what I've learned is there's patterns that evolve, and that we can move those things that are sort of common down to tier 1, and then everybody uses them and everybody's can have access to them. And we don't have to spend as many minutes giving something to so like a quick example here, Ben, that's coming to my mind is because it's certainly happening in the world of AAC. We have more people than ever doing lessons where at a very early age, everyone in the class is learning about how to be a communication partner. And we have the communication symbols up on boards where any kid can come use them, whether you're giving me the thumbs up, whether you're an English language learner or a multi-language learner, or whether you're not, or whether you're an AAC user, everyone can access those. If you can see, you can access those. And so we can use those as an instructional tool. Some people might absolutely need it, and there might be customizations we need. That would be that top of the triangle. But let's move it in that direction so that everybody can access it. And I just have to wonder if you yourself grew up in that sort of environment, right? If that abandonment of Dynavox wouldn't have happened, right? Because, oh man, yeah, Ben's using AAC and this kid over here is using AAC. And I used it for a while when I was learning English, and it was just part of the culture of the environment if we would have less abandonment. And that's certainly something I've seen too, Ben, is over the years, oh, this middle school kid, let's give him this pen, or let's give him this Alpha Smart, or let's give him this thing because that'll help them read or write or whatever. But they're the only one using it. How many middle school kids are going to be like, oh, I really want to look different from all of my friends? Some will, and they will. It's fine. But most, I've just seen it fail too often. That abandonment happens. So I think, what if we could make it available to everyone so that, yeah, my friends use it and I can learn from them and they can learn from me. And we're all just all access. You're nodding fervently. So I'm seeing you're agreeing with me. Yeah. So that's my thought.
So I think it would be really important if everyone knows we all use AAC as some actually not even on occasion every day, as you go answering your question, and I gave you your zone. Yes. and AAC, and so if everybody has the opportunity to utilize it as not only as communication device. I think a lot of the stigma around this would probably disappear.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking too. The stigma around it, which shouldn't even exist, but it does. So how can we get rid of that nasty thing? It's like, well, let's make sure everybody understands that, hey, did you send an emoji today in your text message? Guess what that is, right? Did you send a GIF today in your text message? Guess what that is? Oh, even the text that you send, if you're not using your voice, your verbal, your organic voice, then that's AAC. But can I ask you, Ben, so you're nodding, right? I think we're on the same page. You say you give me the thumbs up, and that's a form of AAC. Here's where I get nervous. I get nervous that some people who are AAC users might go, Chris, when you say that, you might be stealing part of my identity because I identify that. And you're sort of dispersing it out, saying everybody is an AAC user. And no one has ever said that to me. I've never heard that, but maybe people are listening and they're thinking that way. I get nervous in my own head that someone might have that I might be accidentally stealing someone's identity by doing that. So what are your thoughts on that? It's like, no, or yeah, actually, I don't know. What I could use some feedback there and some guidance because I get stuck in my own head about that.
I understand why people feel that way because even, or no, because a lot of communication is verbal. I mean, if you are at school, you typically have verbal communication with the other people in your class. You deserve so because a lot of communication is verbal, and there are people who cannot verbally communicate. I understand where they are coming from. However, if people won't know adapting of different ways of communication, then I think people who use AAC may suddenly have a lot more opportunities because communication would no longer be an obstacle. And no, no example, no interviews, and I'm in for a job on a job interview. I am very nervous to use the AAD because the business and I know I am going down a rabbit hole anyway. The business industry is very, very fast moving. So if I take 15 seconds to type out a very simple sentence on my AAC. I may not be hired because if they have to wait 15 seconds every time they ask me a question, then I only know a few people who would be okay with that. In all honesty, I'm not trying to be hard on the human race or anything, but we live in a very fast moving world. So if we could figure out a way to remove the obstacles of AAC and people not being able to communicate globally. I mean, we could give so many people many more opportunities. So, that sense, I do not feel saying everybody is an ASC user is taken away from anything. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes. Okay, here's how I first thank you for that because that really helps me. Let me just again, I like to summarize here. So, if you might be nervous to go out in an interview. Other AAC users might be nervous to go out in an interview because you might think if I use my AAC and they need to wait for me to formulate because industry moves so fast and the interviewer or the person doing the hiring would say, we work on teams and people have questions and this person might know the answer, but it takes a while for them to formulate it. Should I hire them or should I hire somebody who can do it faster? But if that person who is doing the hiring, maybe and if that person who's doing the hiring had grown up in an experience where in classes from kindergarten, first grade, all through their educational experience and in through their university experience or whatever, even if it's not university, they're just immersed in a culture where everyone uses symbols and we all wait for each other. And when you send a text message, don't you wait patiently for a response from somebody else? So if they're sort of learning that everyone has abilities, and sometimes you need to wait, then it becomes less of a big deal when it's a job thing. It's like, yeah, we all kind of understand that you just wait because the idea is going to rock. And I'll wait for the awesome idea because this person has awesome ideas. So I'm willing to wait for it because I'm used to doing that, right? And I wouldn't want to risk not hiring this person because someone else can talk faster and might just because you can talk faster doesn't necessarily mean you have the better ideas, right? So all right, and then just to come back to that whole identity piece is that what I think I am taking away from our conversation is that it does more good than harm to think about how can we move things from tier 3 to tier 1 and make a more accepting, understanding that we all use AAC environment. So let's put our time there. Let's put our energy there. And yes, there might be a little bit of identity theft, but we can say that's not what we're meant. We're not trying to do that, right? We're trying to make it decrease other barriers for you and give you more opportunities. Does that summarize it? Okay, you're giving me a big thumbs up, but people can't see it, so I was just and the big smile. So I appreciate it. Awesome. All right, what else you got for me? And thank you for that.
Question to the last. Do you have a starting point on the spectrum of no-tech to high-tech technology? Or again, does it strictly depend on the individual's needs?
Yeah, okay. What an awesome question. So the answer is no. And in fact, I don't even really use that term anymore. No-tech to low-tech to mid-tech to high-tech. It sort of paints the picture. Here's why I don't tend to use it. It sort of paints the picture of a continuum, and it sort of leads, meaning that maybe you have to start in a certain place and end in a certain place. And I just don't find that true anymore. I'd like to characterize it differently as people need access to stuff, and they need access to people that can help them learn how to use that stuff. And whatever gets the job done, then that's the tool. And it doesn't mean that it has to be high tech or it has to be low tech or you start with low tech or high tech. I feel like, especially in AAC, that has been a huge barrier for people. And it continues to be, is that, well, I got to try these paper-based things first. I got to try this low tech thing first. And then I can get to the high tech. What? No, you don't have to do that, right? That's what a major theme of this whole podcast. When it's all said and done, I hope Rachel and I would both, I think, agree that's got to be a major theme, is that you don't have to start with low tech, right? You can certainly start with something robust, with something high tech. So I don't really know how it even serves us to have a continuum of, or why we would describe technology as no tech, mid tech, low tech, high tech. It's just stuff. I need stuff. And what stuff do you need? So I really liked the idea of when you are thinking towards the what do people need, of thinking it, whether that's tier 1 and what am I thinking for everybody, or tier 3, what are the individual things, is looking at it from either a feature matching perspective or a mass feature matching perspective. So feature matching, what does the person need? And let me be as descriptive as possible of what this person needs. They need word prediction. They need to be able to type fast. They need something that has a long charge. They need something that's portable. They need something that has a different language. They need something that can talk to the internet and send text messages, like whatever the criteria is, right? So that becomes the list. And then I go look for options that will do that in the least restrictive way. And then so that's individual, but that's the same questions you would ask. Well, what can I do for the masses that way? What do the masses need? I'll fill out that first column. And then, okay, let me go look for the technology that will meet the masses, knowing it won't meet everybody. We'll customize from there. But I think the questions are, the process is the same of asking it. And nowhere in that process is it, but first we should start with something low tech, mid tech, or high tech. I like to think of it as first we need to be thinking about what's least restrictive. And that doesn't necessarily mean to start with something low tech or high tech or whatever. So I kind of abandoned those about 10 years ago, maybe 15.
I actually really agree with you and the thinking about it because if someone needs something and you have something in mind to help that individual. Why is it important to ask yourself as low tech, as high tech? Why it is not important because in the grand scheme of things is going to help someone. That is the important thing.
Ben, can I also add to that answer? Something I've learned, again, in the last 6 or 7 years of doing this podcast, specifically around AAC users, but really I think it's anyone, again, in that same context of we all use technology to improve our lives. Something I've learned is that people use multiple things to do the same task in different environments. So I might use a low tech thing, like if I'm in the pool, I might not be taking my iPad into the pool, but I still need to communicate. So sometimes I'm going to use this and sometimes I'm going to use that based on the environment I'm in. And that can shift and change on the fly, like right within minutes, And so it's helping people sort of think through a skill. What would be the tool I should use right now? And how did that work for you? And what would you next time you're in that situation, would you do it the same? And I don't know that we ask those questions enough. So, and you're nodding and giving me the thumbs up. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. So if I go to a noisy restaurant, for example, my device is not going to be loud enough, so my children to hear what I am ordering. So I have another app to it does not produce any speech, but I write what I want and I hold my phone up and so no, no, so it is exactly what you're saying. I have another question.
Okay. Okay. And just before you ask that, I want to make sure I summarize to make sure I heard you correctly. You already have at least two apps that you use, which you would consider, well, again, we already discussed that they're all AAC, right? So you go and in the noisy environment, you might switch over and use the handwriting, and that is handwriting to text. Does it turn into text, or is it just the handwriting?
No, it is typing.
It's typing. Okay.
However, there's no voice.
Right. You're just showing it to someone and they're reading it. And that's how the server in this loud environment can go, okay, that's what you want. Great. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And again, don't we all do that to some extent where we are in this environment? I'm going to use this tool, and in this environment, I'm going to use that tool. And I'm constantly trying to think what's the best way to do this. And yeah. Okay. So, okay. Well, sorry. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. What's your question?
When do you start thinking about possible AT solutions? Do you wait until the observations and interviews are complete, or are the gears turning during the interviews and observations?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. Okay. So I wish I could tell you that I divided in my brain a strictly I'm observing and asking questions, and then I switch as a switch in my brain, and then I analyze the answers to those questions or look at the data from the observations to then kind of create the options that I would like to consider. And if I was first starting out, I would certainly suggest trying to do that. Like, just keep an open mind. Don't try and solve anything yet. Just ask a lot of questions and gather data. And then use that data, analyze that data to come up with options. But now so Ben, I just, this past year, I turned 50, my 50th birthday, and I've been doing this for a long time. And I think you get some experience there, which can be dangerous a little bit because sometimes you have some confirmation bias. Oh, I think I know what you need already. And so I have to challenge myself to continue to ask the questions, be patient, not jump to an answer, because I want to make sure it's the right thing, not just the thing that, to solve it fast and move on. And like you said, we are in a fast-paced society, and education is not immune to that. So we yeah, teacher, you don't have time. Yeah, just use this. Get him this. This is your thing. Which again, sometimes that's okay. It's like I've done the feature matching so rapidly in my brain because I've done it so often, and kids maybe fit a profile that is like they so many other kids that I've worked with have done this kind of use the same technology, the same tool. So try that. Do you know about that? So I'm not saying that's awful, but when it's a really complex situation, I really do want to sit and listen and ask questions. And then also, not just that, I'll tell you, just like recently I met with an administrator, and that administrator said, Chris, I would like you to come out and I want to talk about inclusive practices, not really even technology, just the design of instruction and what we could do differently. And again, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. There's a temptation to come in and go, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to start thinking about it in an MTSS model. And are you thinking at an MTSS model? And have you heard of Universal Design for Learning? And I just want to spit out all these things, which is also a little self-serving. Like, look how smart I am. I know all this stuff. And you asked me to come out as an expert in this. Then I realized, no, that's not really how the needle moves. I've done that in the past and it has failed miserably. People actually haven't changed or listened. They maybe have listened, but nothing actually changed. So now I'm trying to be more patient in those conversations to say, let me actually understand the barriers. Let me ask you way more questions. Let me lean into asking way more questions. Let me ask you about data that you are collecting. And when I say data, I really mean evidence. What evidence do you have to back up the answers that you're saying? Or are you sort of, is it conjecture? And so I'm trying to be more, I guess that's a goal for myself, is to try and be more patient, to ask more reflective questions, summarize things like I'm sort of doing here, summarize what I think I hear you say. And yeah, so that's, again, a long-winded answer to say that sometimes it's okay to kind of do the rapid feature matching and say, teacher, you just need to use this, and teach the kid using this. But sometimes it's trying to be more patient, asking more questions, and helping the teacher either come up with it or the student come up with it themselves, so that they're reflecting. Or I need to take a step back and really listen to all the answers to people's questions, or the answers to my questions, so I have a better picture. So that's a little bit of a towing the line. I'm a wishy-washy answer, but I think that's the answer.
That is a great answer. Thank you. And so all of my guesses before sending gas, we only have to train an individual on a piece of assistive technology, and so this really is my first time starting the process from the beginning of the whole process. So you and those is going to help me a lot, and I hope to try and concentrate more on the interview, on the observation. I only have one more question if we have time.
Sure. Okay. Yes, definitely ask one more question, but I do want to comment on what you just said there. Some other advice that I might give you, Ben, since you're saying I'm really starting out and I'm really going to spend more time listening to an individual and asking a lot of questions to make sure I'm getting that right. A great framework to help you do that is that set framework that we talked about. And certainly when I started, the way I did it, and I think this was really helpful for me, is I created like a quadrant. And when I heard people talking about students' abilities, I put it in the S quadrant, little notes in the S quadrant. And then, they're talking about a task that they're asking the student to do. They need to write this thing, or they need to carry this stuff. Let me put that in the task bucket. And then let me, they're talking about the environment, so that whatever the environment, like it's noisy in our classroom. Okay, that's talking about the environment. Let me put that down. And that it doesn't necessarily need to be, let me ask you about the student, let me ask you about the environment, let me ask you about the tasks. But as the conversation evolves and you're asking questions, you can do that. And then the other thing that I would really lean into, Ben, if you haven't seen it, and I'm sure Cindy shows it, but I'm not, Dr. George shows it, but maybe not. I don't know. I didn't take the class. It's something called the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative, the WATI. If you haven't heard of that,
Wow.
yeah, that can help you know what questions to ask. Right. So I really think of it as a three-prong approach. Is first is I use that phrase too much. Three things together. One is asking the questions from the WADI to complete a framework like the SET framework to then do feature matching. And if you use all three of those together, I don't think you can go wrong. Is that helpful?
Very helpful. Very true.
All right. What's your last question? I'll spend as much time as you need.
How much on a set schedule is the AT process as a whole? I mean, I know you want to set deadlines because you want the student to get AT in a reasonable time frame. But let's say you have the AT team meeting one day and you schedule the next team meeting for 2 weeks later. But the very next day, you think of a piece of AT that may be great for the student. In that case, would you try it and possibly bring it to the AT team before the next meeting? Or would you stick to the timeline? Let's also say there were no confounding factors, like the whole AT team could meet the next day.
Okay, excellent questions. So the first thing to answer that question is, who's on the AT team? And do you think of them as a separate entity from the team working with the student or the person? So for instance, in a school district, Ben, I work in a school district that has me and 9 facilitators that have assistive technology in our job title. And we would be called the AT team. But when we're working with an individual student, what we're really working with is the speech therapist that works with that student, the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, the teacher, the parents, right? That's their support team. And those are the people that are really making the person themselves making a decision about what the technology should be, not our separate, although we'll brainstorm together with really interesting or complex, unique cases, it's not really this separate team of 9 or 10 people that are making a decision. It's the ones closest to the student. So I just clarify that. And then to your point about, or your question about, well, okay, I learn about this new thing, or I think about this new thing. Do I bring it to that support team? The answer is maybe, but not likely. And the reason I would say that is, that doesn't mean to stick to some strict timeline. But if we're going through a process where we have really done due diligence, where we have done our due diligence around feature matching, and we really have a lot of items that we're considering about what the student's abilities are and what their environment are, if we spend some minutes there getting that right and going, okay, I really have a clear picture. And then when I say we as the support team have a really clear picture. And then we have presented options. So I'm doing this column, like the first column is where all the, and this feature matching, right? And then the second column where I put the options. So let me go find options that for consideration. Let me find something that sort of checks off all the boxes as much as possible that we said in the first column, our needs. Then I found something that meets those needs. Then what are the chances 2 weeks later, I'm going to find something else that is even better, maybe, but we just started implementing this thing. Let's see how that goes. Unless it was some sort of glaringly obvious thing, like we could not find an assistive technology. We couldn't find an AAC tool in Vietnamese. Of course we can, but let's just say I don't know. Let's jump on the top of my head. And this family speaks Vietnamese at home, and we can't find anything. Oh, wait a second. Now I learned that Avaz speaks Vietnamese, and I didn't know that before. Then I would maybe bring it back to the table. You know what I mean? It would have to be something really like, oh, I found something that really meets even more of the check marks, that because we had to compromise. We couldn't get yeses in all the columns, but this thing actually is more. Then I would bring it back. But that is sort of rare because we are now hunting for, if I did Google searches and I asked other AT professionals, you guys know anything that speaks Vietnamese? Someone probably has had that problem before. When I say problem, that challenge before, like, oh yeah, what is the tool that does all these things that includes Vietnamese? And so I can probably find it. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's kind of rare that would happen. But Yeah, I guess that's the way I'd answer that question.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
So I'm just trying to process all of the information. Um, okay.
Well, just to comment on that for a second, Ben, I'm going to send you this video and then you can watch it at 2 times the speed and scrub to the spot where you need. And you can use your Adobe skills to cut it all up and just get the needs that you need. And any of the resources I mentioned, and you're like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I can email those to you. This at the end of this interview doesn't mean it has to be the end of our relationship, right? Like you can email me and
No.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for, your willingness to record this. And again, don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out and we will, for these sorts of resources or anything, I'm happy to help.